All right, it's nice to get that applause. Thank you, Wesley, from behind the scenes. My name is Beth Gilligan. I'm Director of Development and Marketing at the Coolidge Corner Theater. Thank you so much for joining us for this evening's special Q&A for the film Stray. It's, of course, presented as part of our Science on Screen series. So before we get started, just a few sort of housekeeping items and thank yous. First of all, Stray is an extraordinary film. If you haven't seen it already, I highly encourage you to. It is screening as part of our virtual screening room on Coolidge.org. And anytime you purchase a ticket to that, you support our nonprofit organization during there's been a challenging almost a year. We're coming up upon our year-long anniversary of being closed due to COVID, but we've been so appreciative of the support that we've gotten from the community and also for being able to offer these amazing films. So Science on Screen is brought to us by with the support of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and Doran Weber is the VP of programs there. We've been working with them for over 10 years. Science on Screen is a program that started at the Coolidge in 2005. And then with the support of Sloan, we've now been able to expand it to 96 cinemas across the country in 42 states, 274 grants. It's been an amazing program. It's everywhere from Juneau, Alaska, to New York City, to Little Rock, to Honolulu, to Nashville, to New Hampshire. And then on March 24th, we're actually going to all come together for a national evening of Science on Screen at the Coolidge. We're going to be hosting UCLA political science and economics professor Michael Cheff for a talk tied to the movie Clueless. He's the author of a book called Jane Austen Game Theorist. So he's actually going to be talking about how game theory pertains to the romantic misadventures of Cher Horowitz and her Beverly Hills crew. So be sure to check that out. You can find more info at coolidge.org or scienceonscreen.org. We also want to thank our local sponsors, Ruben Anders Scientific, Ellen Hoffman and Ken Loveday, and our series founder, Richard Anders, and of course, Neil Block and everyone at Magnolia Pictures for helping put together tonight's event. Before I forget, if you have questions for our guests at any time throughout, feel free to just pop them in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can. But first, let me introduce them. We have the filmmaker for Stray, Elizabeth Lowe. She is an award-winning filmmaker whose work has been showcased around the world, including at Sundance Film Festival, Tribeca Film Festival, London Film Festival, Hot Docs, PBS POV, and this is her debut feature documentary. It's won numerous awards at festivals all over the world, and Variety called it the ultimate love letter to dogs and a multifaceted moral inquiry into humanity. And then we have with us Alexandra Horowitz, who is a best-selling author and canine cognition expert. Her books include the #1 New York Times bestseller, Inside of a Dog, What Dogs See, Smell, and Know, Being a Dog, Following the dog into a world of smell, and Our Dogs Ourselves. If you're interested in them, you can purchase them at Brookline Booksmith. Always good to support your local independent bookstore. And she teaches at Barnard College, where she runs the Dog Cognition Lab. So thank you both for joining us this evening, or this morning in Elizabeth's case. She's coming to us from Hong Kong, which I think is the most remote Zoom conversation that we've had throughout the pandemic. So we're very excited that you could join us. So I wanted to just start with a little bit of background about the film before going into the more scientific aspects. So Elizabeth, can you talk to us a little bit about how you came to be in Istanbul and how the film came together?
Yeah, it came from a really personal place, and maybe a lot of pet owners can relate to this. When my childhood dog had passed away, I remember feeling like I had to suppress my grief at his passing because he wasn't a human family member, even though I loved him so much. So I think that dissonance was what propelled me to wanting to examine sort of value and sentience in the form of the value that we assign to a single species. And originally I wanted to do a global study and a cultural comparison of the status of stray dogs around the world, sort of in the end to reveal how arbitrary that value is because it changes with what cultural context you are in. And in the course of my research, I discovered Turkey and how they have this extraordinary relationship with dogs where they were persecuted for 100 years. But in 2004, they passed these laws where it's illegal to euthanize any stray dog or to even hold any healthy stray dog in captivity. And when I arrived there, I was so moved by seeing dogs integrated into the city of Istanbul in a healthy way where they were thriving and able to live life on their own terms. I kind of wanted to capture that for audiences.
Yeah, and the dogs you found are also extraordinary. I think the New York Times in their review, they called Zeytin, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, a star, which I fully agree with. So how did you identify them and know they were the dogs you were going to document?
Yeah, that was really interesting. Actually, I've participated in a panel with Alexandra Horowitz before, and she said Zeytin's behavior is pretty singular, which I found to be the case also in the field when we were casting different dogs. Most stray dogs would bond with us over time and then be very reactive to the camera and be very engaged with me and also be following us back, which would have defeated the whole premise of the film, which was to see where a dog would take you. And see what corners of the city that they would reveal without my will as a storyteller or a filmmaker be imposed, or as a human, especially. And Zeytin was able to embody the spirit that was so stubborn and so independent that she was able to sniff right past me, even if I was inches in front of her face filming her. And we had discovered her when we were just walking through this busy underground tunnel. And we saw her and Nazar streaking past, weaving between people's feet. And we're very intrigued because we wondered where does a stray dog have to go without, jobs or owners? What appointments are they keeping? And they ended up being on the heels of the young Syrian men who become sort of a prominent part of the film.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about them because the film is not, of course, just about dogs. And Turkey is home to I believe it's over 3 million refugees, most of them from Syria. It sounds like you really conceived of the project as being about the dog population. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering at what point did they come in, and at what point did you know they were going to be such a central part of the story?
It wasn't until later that I realized they would become a central part of the story, because it was really important. It was Zeytin who led us to them. And it was really important to me that the film not have this human relationship, which is so compelling to people, I think, and also to me, not have that overtake the film that was supposed to be about Zeytin's life and the stray dog's life, living life outside of a relationship with people. Because I had wanted the film to be this exercise in stepping away from this human-centric view of the world. So in the editing process, I feel like I was trying to be very conscious of allowing the narrative to weave in and out of that human relationship, but always return to Zeytin as a solo being through the streets. But it's funny because a lot of audiences, they'll remember very prominently the young men's relationship with the dog, which also is no surprise to me because I think Alexandra could probably talk more to this. We evolved with them and we wouldn't be who we are without dogs. So of course, and vice versa. So of course, we're going to be very attuned to that relationship.
Yeah, perhaps Alexandra, we'd love to bring you in to talk a bit more about the companionship between the dogs and the young boys in the film. And I'm also just curious because a lot of your studies have taken place out of New York City. So you've looked at urban dogs certainly before, but just in seeing that, having lived in New York 8 years, you don't see dogs kind of weaving through traffic and just kind of and I'm wondering if there are things that surprised you in seeing the film about the dog's behavior, about the environment, or about their relationship with these men. So it's sort of a multi-part question.
Yeah, I was really impressed by what Elizabeth was able to do in following these dogs and giving us a sense of the kind of parallel reality that they were living in. In New York, we do not experience stray dogs for the most part, because unlike in Istanbul, as Elizabeth says, here they're rounded up, right, and brought to animal control. But in this context, what she was able to capture was that they have their own lives. And I loved, and that's what was so delicious to me, when I interact with dogs for our research, we see them for just the snippet of their life. And moreover, they're brought by their people and they are sort of controlled by their people, right? Like dogs who are owned have a very controlled life. They're not just able to make decisions on their own. And so what I thought was especially neat was seeing all those decisions, right? Which were, of course, opaque to us initially about what Zeytin is doing, where she's going, what she sees up ahead or why she's taking that turn. And maybe in the end, we still don't know. But what we see is that she is making deliberate decisions. There's intention behind her behavior. And it's just a good reminder of their independent lives from us, even when they're living, in the same house with us. So I think that was the most marvelous thing for me about seeing that. I never see that in studying dogs. So it was actually a side of, except for, my own dogs, but even those, right, I see through my family gaze. So this was really maybe the only glimpse I've had of continuously experience a dog experiencing her own life on her own terms.
Yeah, and we're talking a little bit about this right before we went live. You talked about just with the pandemic in your lab and how you've talked about using citizen science. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Has that opened things up globally as to what you've been able to study in regards to dogs? Can you first give people background of what you've been doing?
Yeah, the Dog Cognition Lab is a place where we don't keep dogs. We actually just have dogs and their people come in to do a little study with us, or we videotape them out in the wild, which is like the New York City park or in their owners' homes, right? Their natural environment. And since we're not able to do anything in person, we've been doing citizen science projects where we design some experiments and ask for participants. And actually the people at home do the experiment with their dogs. And in other cases, we ask people to kind of capture certain behaviors. So for instance, we're looking at dog-cat play, which has not really been studied before, and whether, although it sometimes does work, whether they're using kind of different signals with each other. So we ask people to videotape that, and then we code that behavior. So one nice thing is we are always studying, kind of Northeast US dogs, right? New York City. Sometimes we get somebody driving up from Virginia or New Hampshire or something like that, but mostly a specific kind of Western dog, which is not representative of the dogs in the world. Right? Most dogs in the world are not owned dogs. And many have lives like what Elizabeth captures in this film, if they're lucky. And so this, even in our citizen science, now we can at least reach people in different cultures who are interested in participating with their dogs, and we're getting data from them. So that's a nice change. I don't know if we have any Istanbul subjects right now. I kind of hope so.
Yeah, maybe the film will inspire people. One of the remarkable things about the film, and Elizabeth, you were the cinematographer, as I understand it, is that you talked about the human view, and I sort of felt like it was a dog's eye view of the world, and Alexandra may be able to correct or clarify that a little bit about what dogs see, but I'm just curious about just technically how you got some of those shots. It seemed like you were looking up at humans in many instances, and then there was the dramatic scene where Kartal the puppy was sort of dog napped by the boys, and I didn't know if you used a special camera for that. That sequence was very striking. Can you talk about how you did it, and then Alexandra can maybe chime in about the actual dog's eye view?
Yeah, I remember when conceiving of this film, as a dog lover and a cinema lover, I always felt really frustrated by films that claimed to be about dogs, but never even took the time to try to literally sort of, represent their perspective, which feels like a huge difference to view the world from 2 feet versus 5 feet like us, or 5'5" like us. And so I wanted to figure out a rig, and eventually I couldn't totally figure out a rig. So I kind of just crouched low and used a stabilizer with a vest that would offset the weight from the camera and the stabilizer onto my waist. And with that particular sequence with Kartal and the theft, I actually wasn't aware that the young men were about to create this puppy heist. It's interesting because had I known, maybe I would have stepped in to stop it. But I didn't at the time, so I didn't happen to be filming but we had strapped a GoPro onto Zeytin. And so she happened to record all of that action and drama. But it's interesting because I thought of making the whole film from a GoPro's perspective, but I also felt like it would be too alienating. Already watching a protagonist who doesn't speak and the film doesn't try to speak for that protagonist is already a challenge, I think. So having it be really nauseating visually would have been difficult. And I wanted the cinematography to create, sort of allow viewers to imbue Zeytin with the same rich inner life, or imagine the same rich inner life that they would for a human actress who is silent, or you're just zooming in on the back of their head as they think through the world. So that was sort of how I thought through the cinematography.
I mean, I thought it was so beautiful. Even the simple fact of getting down to the dog's level is profoundly different, right? All of a sudden, it's not just, well, we're at a different height, but everything is different at that height. So as you see people through the film, often you're only seeing the bottom parts of the people. And in fact, that is the dog's experience. And they're talking by, and above the dog. And the people's language gets all muddled together. And so that's wonderful, because that also would be the dog's experience. And I very much liked how you lingered on, these moments which were important for the dogs. Is it this time they spent sniffing each other or around a patch of ground? There's nothing there for you to capture, right? Like, you can't, with your camera, capture what they're experiencing, but you can at least linger in that space and acknowledge, and bring to us that this is what they're experiencing. So I like that a lot, too. And of course, I love that there's no speech of Zeytin, right? Like, that's what is so hard for us as language users to resist, putting words into non-humans' mouths, where, in some ways, the great pleasure of seeing their lives is that it happens without vocal language, right? And having to figure it out based on their behavior alone. So to me, that also a small move, a small choice has a profound result.
Yeah, and you've written, Alexandra, in the past about there is a human tendency to, bring human attributes and sort of anthropomorphize the dog. Oh, look, oh, they look so sad. But can you sort of talk about that divide? Because you mentioned, you observe behavior and you can see certain things, but there were certainly, I don't know, there were moments in the film with Zeytin, especially, where the expressiveness of her face, I even though scientifically I know this is possibly inaccurate, but you almost feel like you're on the journey with her. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Well, if I can just linger on her face for a second, because it is an expressive face. But what she reminds me of is that, she has that inner eyebrow, which she can move to raise or lower. Dogs have evolved from wolves to have this inner eyebrow, which can be raised or lowered, which is just like we do, right? Like, so we recognize that in their face because it mirrors our face to some extent. I can't move my eyebrows independently, right? But even together, that's an expression. So even dogs who have those eyebrows are adopted faster from shelters than dogs who don't seem to use their eyebrows as much. So that's something we can have traction with. But what I like is that most of her behavior is very confusing at first, right? That if we had language, if we just said, I'm going to try to figure out what she's doing by anthropomorphizing her and assuming she wants the things I want, she hears and sees the things I hear and see, then we sort of have a very pat and pretty quick idea of what she's doing. She's going to see that other dog. She's trying to fight, whatever it is. But if you just exist in this space where you're following her behavior and you don't know, you have to be confused at first. And I think that's the position I start from in science, is of confusion, of not knowing, and then asking the dog to tell us by observing them over time. And, we set up experiments where they have restricted things that they can do, and that's how they tell us. But longevity, watching an animal over time, is the way you learn about them, right? As opposed to presumptively assigning them traits that are like us. It's a very natural human tendency to do that, and it's not always wrong. But I do think that it restricts us from seeing the dog's actual experience.
Yeah. I'm also wondering, because in documentary filmmaking, there's often a lot of discussion about, you need to build trust with your subjects. I'm wondering what that process is like when you're filming dogs, as opposed to other shorts you've made or anything.
It was the most joyful process. And I think before I headed out to Turkey, people would always ask, oh, how are you going to deal with packs of stray dogs? It's going to be so dangerous. You're going to get bitten for sure. But when we arrived in Turkey, and especially in Istanbul, because they're treated so well, the dogs were incredibly well socialized, and far more well socialized and even in temperament than I would say most pets that I encounter in the States or in Hong Kong, where pets can be very neurotic and have really quirky personalities. I feel like on the streets, those kind of get sanded down in a way because they have to adapt to all sorts of people and other dogs and cats around them, or even seagulls. So with Zeytin, the bonding process, or with all of the dogs, it was very simple. I was good to them, and I feel like Alexandra was saying, dogs can understand the world in a language much older than words, probably, in your gestures and body language and your micro facial expressions. Because I often felt like Zeytin and the other dogs were reading me, observing me, and understanding exactly how I was feeling, whether I was annoyed with people around me, whether it was kids or men sort of bothering us during production. I would try to be polite. I would try to hide those emotions, but instantly Zeytin always knew. And then they would be very protective, where they would start to harass the kids, or not the young men, but other children in the production that are not in the film, or men. They would bark at them and become fierce suddenly. And it was really a reflection of how I was feeling. So yeah, dogs were incredibly sensitive to whoever is good to them, I think. And they can read people so well. Like in Alexandra's book, she writes that they're the anthropologists, the greatest anthropologists, because they're constantly watching us.
Right. They're observing us all the time, and they learn a lot more about us than we do about them, where we give them a kind of slight glance, and then we go back to the business of whatever we're doing. And they're also very good at making eye contact and looking at us in the face for information. So that's how they're sensitive to your emotional expressions. It changes, slight changes in your expression or body bearing, because they bother to look at us, which is very unlike what wild animals usually do. Staring at another animal is often a threat, and it's avoided. So dogs kind of, through domestication, they've leapt through that barrier. In an owning situation, that enables all sorts of information gathering. It's a really useful trait, but it also gives us the feeling that they are, and probably, in fact, it does enable understanding of us that other non-humans don't have, because they're not observing us as carefully.
Yeah, and that's an interesting observation about the dogs of Istanbul, because as a parent of a toddler, there's one scene where there's a little girl who goes right up to the stray dog on the street, and the parent seems to, that would be such an anxiety-ridden encounter, I think, in many, certainly in America, but it's just this very calm, and you sense the adaptability of the dog in that.
And I bet you, this is making me think, like, I bet you even the people of Istanbul, because they grew up around dogs and having to adjust to dogs also, who are free agents in their city, they've had to learn how to read a dog's body language. So probably that father knew exactly how those dogs were feeling about his daughter. And that's why he was able to encourage his daughter to approach Zeytin and Nazar without fear. Like, it was both ways.
Yeah, I did feel like a lot of people, when you got glimpses of people, they were looking at the dogs. They were still attentive to the dogs, right? They were other people around for them, is basically how I viewed it. They were seeing them as persons. And you can gauge a little bit about their intentions. I love that scene too with the father and toddler, because so much of our learning as children, as humans, about something like a dog is mediated by a parent in that way. And we can teach them a fear, and we can teach them to have our anxiety, or we can teach them to be open to that experience. And so he was doing the latter, which I thought was beautiful.
Yeah, I'm getting the sense you may have to open a field office in Istanbul, Alexandra.
I would do it.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask one more question just about the sound design, because I found it so fascinating. And then we do have a few in the chat that I want to get to. So can you talk a little bit about that, Elizabeth? I know you worked with someone named Ernst Karel, and it's kind of there's a cityscape, but then there are some, distorted frequencies. Also, you just have those beautiful snippets of dialogue. My favorite, I think, has probably been commented on before, the Instagram couple where the woman is sitting with her arms crossed at the table. And were you able to understand the conversations that were going on as you were recording them? Just talk about the sound elements in general in the film, and then if Alexandra can talk about, because you were trying to sort of create that dog like hearing experience at times.
Yeah, so I don't speak Turkish and don't understand it. So I was moving through the city, not understanding at all what anyone was saying, which I actually feel like became a huge benefit to the film, because I felt over time, after months and months of production, I became almost dog-like in how I was understanding the world around me, because you pay so much more attention to people's body language. How close are they allowing me in? How comfortable are they with me filming, and adjusting to that without communicating through words. And with Ernst Karel, I was really thrilled to work with him, because he personally is a huge advocate of non-human rights. And the films he's worked on, Leviathan and Sweetgrass, which is about sheep being herded in Montana, and then Leviathan is about a fishing vessel in, I think, in New England, Boston area. He has always tried to allow sounds beyond our human voices to take a primary spot in the sort of mix that he creates, where he tries to, all the dialogue that you hear in the film is a little bit muffled, or like we were trying to mimic, maybe guessing what a dog's attention span to this Instagram drama or, a political conversation might be, where they lose interest after a while, even though it's so juicy for us. The dogs will wander away soon enough, and the sound is trying to echo that. And there were particular scenes in the film where we did try to literally heighten the frequencies, so that you hear sounds that are not familiar to humans, in this very sort of rudimentary cinematic attempt to suggest sonically, okay, we're in a different space that's not human. They're hearing things differently. Of course, it's not possible to replicate that, but that was our attempt. And we would weave in and out of that space depending on the scene. Like when Zeytin meets that other dog in the park and the dog is walking up and then they start to play. That's a moment where the ambience was thinned out, and different sounds of the natural environment start to sort of become much louder than they would in our regular hearing, in this filmic attempt to try to represent something that we're just grasping at, obviously.
That's such a lovely artistic and scientific approach, right? That's just what I would want to be able to do, to first capture this basically unintelligible language. Sometimes it's relevant to them, and they were sensitive to their names, for instance, right? And to other vocal cues once in a while, but only those that were really directed at them and relevant to them. The rest they let sort of wash over them. And so we mostly, as viewers, I think, feel the same way. And I wasn't even conscious of your other sonic attempts, but there was a kind of hum of the city, right? Like the ambiance of the city that I felt immersed in. And I appreciated that was part of the dog's experience too. It didn't have to be a coherent sound, right? You didn't have to see the location, the source of the sound always. It could just be part of the animal's experience. And of course, dogs can hear higher frequencies, and you can't capture that per se. It's just like, I've always hoped that film could capture in some ways dogs' experience of sense, of smell, where we're not really appreciating how kind of rich and colorful that must be for them. And similarly, we just kind of assume that they're hearing the things we're hearing. So I do think you capture some of the fact that we're not, right? That we're not just hearing the same thing, even though our hearing ranges overlap.
Okay, so we have a couple questions. The first is from Mojo, the Mighty Chihuahua. Hi, Mojo. She says, hi, Elizabeth. You can see it on screen there. I'm curious in how you captured very peculiar reactions from the dogs. Did they react differently when being filmed? And I guess I would extend that to the human subjects as well. Did you sense any consciousness around the camera? And how did you approach the spacing between you and the dogs when filming?
Yeah, I think I had mentioned how Zeytin was singular and how she was unbothered and not as engaged as other dogs were by my camera and the strange contraption that I had with filming them. And because of the way that my camera rig looked, which included this vest with a huge thing hanging off of me, initially, depending on what city in Turkey we were in, we actually traveled to other cities where dogs were more distant from the human populations living in that city. Dogs would bark at me ferociously because I looked so strange. Like I looked like a Terminator to them. But given like just 1 hour, the dogs would adapt very quickly. And it was always interesting if I would be tracking with a dog, being very close to them, inches from their body, crouching low, and then they would encounter a new dog. You would see the look of curiosity and recognition from the new dog being like, what is this? What's happening? But maybe they got some assurance from the dog that I was following that it was okay. But yeah, I can't know what the dogs were thinking of me stalking them with my camera.
But as Alexandra said, dogs are certainly observant and they're studying humans, so they would have most certainly picked up on the different getup that you had got on.
Yeah, I mean, it's very impressive that they weren't put off by that. That's, you know, just even like a large mic is really alarming. And most dogs will respond with alarm, right? And that seems appropriate. So their ability to acclimate to that is a testament to what some glimpse of what their life is actually like, which is, you know, full of sounds and sights that they can't explain and that they have to come to understand. And I do think that they can learn they can learn by observing others, right? So you got a lot of kind of contagious friendliness probably from other dogs if you were affiliated with Zeytin and she allowed you to be close. That makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, then we have another question. I love seeing loving, friendly interactions among the dogs, but I found it hard to watch when Zeytin was hurting, defensive. Did you find it hard to remain an impartial observer in those instances?
Yeah, I mean, as a documentary filmmaker, I don't believe in this ethos of like you just observe reality as it is happening, because inevitably once you're present, you're influencing the reality around you, whether you like it or not. So I do believe in stepping in and intervening when it's needed. And for me, the ethical line that I draw is if there's true harm being done. And in the case of Zeytin, sort of walking into traffic or getting into fights with Nazar or being sort of thrown against a shop window by other dogs whose territory she's entered into, had it gotten to a place where I felt like Zeytin was truly in danger, I would have intervened. But it was never the case with Zeytin. There were moments when actually Nazar, it's not in the film, but Nazar actually got hold of a cat that she was stalking. And once I saw that, I stopped filming and then tried to save the cat or sounded the alarm so that other people would come in and save the cat, which happened. So I don't believe in being an impartial observer because I feel like you have to first operate as a human. And you're responsible to your subjects. And Kartal was a big ethical dilemma. We wondered. It was so clear with the talking about eyebrows and that shot of his close up. You can see his eyebrows are like this because he's so sad of being separated from his family, and you could tell he was suffering. And we wondered whether to return him to the construction site, but we had, it was like a Pandora's box of questions and speculating. But would his life become better by adapting to the streets, just like Zeytin and Nazar, and being a part of this human dog pack? And whether we had how patronizing it would be and what emotional impact it would have on the young men to take away this dog that they had worked sort of hard to acquire and obviously needed on some level. So it was really tough.
Yeah,
but before we could intervene, the police
Yeah.
intervened.
Yeah, he really did seem to be providing emotional support and companionship for the boys in such a major way.
Yeah.
And I know in their therapy dogs, I don't know if that's something you've studied at length, Alexandra, the role that dogs can play in comforting people who are clearly enduring or healing from traumatic circumstances. Did you?
Right. I don't study therapy dogs per se, but that's one of the facets of this very complex human-dog relationship. But in all cases, what's happening is that the mere presence of this dog, this unjudging observer who is loyal, who keeps returning to you, who doesn't seem to hold a grudge, does seem to have this edifying effect for us. And I also thought interesting with those boys stealing the puppy was that even in a kind of non-ownership environment where these are stray dogs, right? There was this urge to take on, right, to own, or maybe we could say just join their pack, join their family. But this urge to, sort of possess and keep close. And I think that's something we can all relate to. That is partly the urge we have to adopt a dog or buy a dog, is to kind of compel them to be with us. And I'm very interested in the complexity of that and whether that's always the best thing for the dog. And so you were right in the middle of it. I didn't envy you that decision and figuring out where to be impartial and where to step in.
And then we have another question. Claire is asking, have you kept in touch with the Syrian refugee boys or anyone who's able to update you on Zeytin and the other Istanbul dogs?
So I haven't been able to keep in touch with the Syrian men because they don't have cell phones. But Zeynep Kopperlu, who's our co-producer, who is based in Istanbul, she will often, once every few months, send me sort of photos from her phone, impromptu photos taken of Zeytin and the young men whenever she encounters them in Taksim Square or the usual places where they hang out. So I was very worried about what happened to them during the pandemic, especially with lockdowns. How do these beings who survive on all the leftovers from restaurants and things survive? But I was very happy to hear from Zeynep and also to read in the news that the government set up lots of, and they usually do anyway, but probably more than usual, set up a lot of feeding stations where all the stray animals were fed. And then people also volunteered, which I wasn't surprised by at all, given what I observed about Turkish society and their relationships to stray animals. So I don't know actually what happened to Kartal after he disappeared with the police. That was one of my profound regrets, that we didn't choose to intervene and just sort of return Kartal to the construction site where his mother and brothers were, because we didn't foresee that this would happen with the police. Although I suspect that the police probably took Kartal in because legally the police were supposed to return Kartal to a government shelter. But we had relationships with all the shelters and Kartal never showed up in those shelters. So that we're suspecting that unofficially a police adopted Kartal, or that's at least what we hope.
Yeah, because there was a tagging system. Actually, a Turkish friend explained this to me because I didn't quite grasp, if you want to talk a little bit about that. Some of them had tags on their ears. What system is in place in Turkey?
Yeah, so when the government picks dogs up to vaccinate them, they'll tag them in their ears and then release them back onto the streets after they've been vaccinated. So that's just the system. It's not like a tracking device or anything. It's just a piece of plastic.
Yeah. Well, I'm very glad to hear that Zeytin's still making the rounds and they've been cared for so well during the pandemic. Shifting gears a tiny bit, I'm just curious, Alexandra, because many people have adopted a dog, rescued a dog, or brought a puppy home during this time. What effect, if any, do you think this sort of boom in dog ownership is or maybe or dog guardianship, or however you want to term it, is going to have on your field, if any?
If I were a trainer, I know that I would be getting a lot of business because people who adopted or bought dogs, right, were really unable to socialize them, aren't really prepared to deal with anxiety that dogs are bound to feel when they're separated from their persons. So we're going to have a lot of separation anxiety cases. I think it's pretty interesting that there was this rush of interest in, I mean, kind of compulsion to try to take in someone else, right? To be near someone else. And so I find that kind of edifying about our feelings for dogs, implicating them as like real members of our society. I have some concern that there will be dogs that are given up. This is sort of right about now. If you got a dog about a year ago, it's like nearly a teenager, and it's a difficult time, and people will give up their dogs, right? And then they become harder to adopt again, and they haven't been socialized with other people and other dogs, and that could present a challenge. You know, for my research, I'm just watching. I'm not gonna I can't speculate about what that will mean, but I look forward to meeting some of these puppies. We adopted a puppy ourselves very early on, who I've been following, and so I see up close what it means to not be in the kind of situation that Zeytin and the other dogs are, which is around people all the time, right? Having to become accustomed to the cars racing by, people touching you all the time. I was very struck by that, how much people who were just passing would put their hands on Zeytin's head, and she just allowed it, right? I mean, that if we think, oh, that's normal, how extraordinary for a dog for an animal, for a non-human animal, to allow people to touch you, people who you don't know, that the level of trust that she has in others and the changes that domestication have brought are really visible. But you can also undo that by keeping a dog separate from people for a long time and making it really difficult. So I do think that this can be really a contrast between kind of these very well-adjusted stray dogs, yeah, like in a really rich society of people, with what we're kind of creating with quarantine. But we shall see.
Yeah. I was just on another panel, and another animal rights advocate told me, somebody who works on behalf of farm animals was telling me that pet ownership actually has a huge impact on how people see other animals, which I thought was so interesting. They saw a correlation a few years back in California when they tried to pass Prop 2, which was, I think it was for pigs, whether their crate should like allow pigs to move at all. And they found a direct correlation between the people who voted yes to banning this really cruel form of housing pigs with pet ownership. So I think with people acquiring pets, hopefully they don't abandon them. But in that process, it's a form of education about other species. It's like it opens up your mind once you get to know another species intimately to probably all other species. At least you can make this leap because of this intimate relationship you have with your dog.
Yeah, I completely agree. When you start having empathy for a non-human other, then you say, well, why am I stopping just with this one quadruped, right? What about that other one? And there are these great comparative cognition research studies now happening where this types of research that studies have been run with dogs are being run with pigs or sheep or chickens or cows. And what you see, goats are very good at recognizing people, for instance, right? And sheep can recognize faces. And you think, oh, you know, we're always creating fairly arbitrary divides between humans and the rest of the world. And the more we can break down that divide, the better we'll be, and the better the non-humans will be as well.
Yeah, we have a lot to learn from the animal world. Okay, just to wrap things, because we are an art house cinema, I have to ask, do you guys have favorite movie dogs? And I'm talking narrative, not documentary. I mean, I can start because I think Uggy and the Artist, truly extraordinary dog performance there, plus Asta, the Thin Man movies we were talking about. Do you guys have personal favorites?
I personally don't. I hate dog acting in fiction films because it just feels like you can tell they're not actually experiencing anything real, and they're trained with certain movements. I don't know. I'm not super informed, but I don't like dogs in fiction films just because it feels, I don't know whether dogs, I guess they must have a concept of acting, but it just feels very disingenuous
That's a
in
question
terms
for
of the
Alexandra.
performance.
Yeah, I too, the favorite dogs that I've seen recently in film were in a film called, I think it was Reyes, which
Oh,
was
yeah.
about, which was another documentary about, I think the kids kind of around a skate park, and then there were two dogs there who lived there, who you come to know, and the filmmakers follow them and their friendship, and you really see their friendship blossom. And I love those dogs very much. Again, I want to see dogs as they are, really, and I'm admiring of dogs who can be trained to be acting with human actors. I'm reminded of something that Susan Orlean once wrote about Rin Tin Tin. She wrote a book about Rin Tin Tin and about how, he was a great hero. He was a great acting hero, or she was a great acting hero, the many Rin Tin Tins. And part of what made her heroic seeming was that she was in silent films where none of the people could talk either, right? And her kind of the pleasure of dogs' quietness on their own terms could a little bit, I mean, she was trained as well, but could a little bit come forth, right? And then when all the films went to talkies, Rin Tin Tin's star kind of dimmed a little bit, because then she was just a dog among people again. So those films that just allow the dogs to shine on their own terms, I think those are my favorite dogs in the end.
Yeah, that's a great book. Okay, well, Elizabeth, I think your film is absolutely beautiful, and it does justice to Zeytin and other incredible creatures in it, and just such great insights into their life and in the rhythms of the streets you capture. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
As you can see from below, the film is now playing at coolidge.org/virtual. Please tell your friends to check it out. It's going to be on our virtual screening room for some time. Thank you to Alexandra and Elizabeth for joining us this evening, and have a good night.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.